Sidney read this morning from Acts 14, and there we were back in Lystra again, 1,000 years after this strange story. And these two fellows come into Lystra, one of them an old man with a white beard, that was Barnabas, one of them a young man who talked a lot, that was the Apostle Paul. And when they came to Lystra, they healed a man who had been born lame. And when the people saw that, what did they think of immediately? They remembered the story of Zeus and Hermes. And they said to one another, "Oh my goodness, Zeus and Hermes have become human again and have come back to Lystra. Let's not make a mess of it this time like we did before." And the priest of the temple of Zeus came into the middle of the town with bulls and flowers to sacrifice before Paul and Barnabas. And the people pointed to Barnabas and said, "Look, he is old with white hair. He must be Zeus." And they pointed at Paul and said, "He talks a lot. He must be Hermes." And they began to bow down and worship Paul and Barnabas, thinking that they were Zeus and Hermes. How would you like that? How would you like to have people bowing down before you and saying, "What should we do? How can we please you? We will give you anything that you want." When you think of Paul and what he had been, and the fact that he had lived a life of power and privilege, and he knew what it was to be in a position of power, you think he might have been tempted just for a minute to soak it up and enjoy it. But of course, this was not Saul of Tarsus any longer. This was the Apostle Paul. And you remember from the last time, this was the person who, back in Cyprus, had decided to empty himself of all power, all arrogance, and all might, that he might serve Christ. And so he and Barnabas said to those people, "Would you please stop this? Take away the bulls and take away the flowers. We are only human beings like you." And then Paul did the thing that he did wherever he went. He said to the people, "I have come here with a message. I have come here to tell you about the God who made the stars and the planets, the God who gives the rain that falls to feed and give you strength. That God has been revealed in Jesus." And the people began to believe what Paul was preaching, not because they were amazed by his great power, but because the message he gave, the message that the God of the universe truly is love, that message made sense to them, and they began to believe. Then a very strange thing happened. I mentioned to you that Paul came to Lystra by way of Antioch and Iconium. In both of those two cities, Paul had been rejected and stoned and cast out of the city by people who wouldn't receive this new message. And now those people from Antioch and Iconium, they had followed Paul and Barnabas to Lystra, and they showed up just as those two men were preaching the gospel. And they must have been powerful and influential, because they were able to convince the people of Lystra that Paul and Barnabas were bad and that their message was wrong. And all of a sudden, those people who a moment ago had been bowing down to Paul and Barnabas decided to stone them to death. And we aren't quite sure what happened to Barnabas at this point, but they did stone Paul. And you know about the ancient ritual of stoning. You know how cruel and vicious and deadly it is. They threw stones at Paul until he was dead. Or at least until they thought he was dead. His lifeless corpse was lying on the ground, and then they picked him up by his feet, and they dragged him out through the city gate, and they threw him onto the garbage heap, where the scavenger animals would pick away at him until he was gone. It's a strange thing that in one moment people bow down and call you a god, and in the next moment they stone you to death and throw your lifeless body out onto the garbage heap. The life of an evangelist in that context was very frightening and very painful. Now, what is going to happen to Paul? What do you do when something like that happens to you? And the underlying theme of today's sermon is the P in disciple, the P which stands for perseverance. Paul wakes up on the garbage heap, broken and bloody and battered. Wakes up, and of course, coming back into consciousness, he wonders to himself, where am I? What has happened to me? What am I going to do now? And you think the reasonable thing to do, if you did recover your strength, would be to move on to the next place. But that's not what Paul did. Paul stood up in the garbage heap. He wiped himself off the best that he could. He got back a little bit of strength. And he walked back into the city center of Lystra. And he said to the people, my gosh, I must have made a really great impression on you. You obviously are interested in talking about God and faith, so I'm coming back in to tell you more about it. And there you see a little bit of the character of that disciple Paul. When people wanted to bow down and worship him, he pushed them away and said, no, don't do it. When he was way up high on top of the world, he said, no, I haven't come for this. I have come to tell you the story of the love of God revealed in Jesus Christ. And then when he was at the lowest low, broken and battered and bloody and lying on the garbage heap, he said, I didn't come for this. And he got back up. And he went back into the city of Lystra. And once again he began to preach. The God of the stars and the planets, the God of the rain that gives you life, that God is pure love and is with you and is revealed in the person of Jesus Christ and will give you strength and blessing for everything in your life. Whether Paul was at the highest height or the lowest low, he brought himself back to the gospel of Christ, saying, this is what I was born for. And after Paul had preached again in Lystra, he went on to Derbe, and from Derbe he then traced his way back to Lystra again, and to Iconium, and to Antioch, to every city where he had been stoned and thrown out, to preach love and mercy.